Hey, hello everybody. Welcome to the Prophet Daniel Has Spoken Research channel. So I watched this debate which happened between Brancatella and David Wood, and I would like to share my thoughts about this particular debate. I also watched previously the debate between David Wood and Hakika Jew, and I thought David had finished the debate strong. I could even grant him the win on that particular debate. I thought Hakika Jew, although he tried to sort of level it up towards the end with the general confirmation um, idea, but I believe Hakika Jew had clearly lost the debate in between, like when the main argumentation. I think that it was the cross exam that was going on between David Wood and um, Hakika Jew, right? So I think there was a point where he lost the argument. I think it's on 279 or 285 or 289, somewhere there. I'll get to that when I do a debate review of Hakika Jew and David Wood. Hopefully, I don't promise that, but hopefully, if I do that, then I'll cover that up over there. But in this particular debate, Brancatella and David Wood, let me share my thoughts here straight up. I believe David Wood started strong, like he laid out the premises of what an Islamic dilemma is, and he sort of built into the narrative pretty strong, and he established certain points of how the believers can mistreat the Quran, and he built on that, predicated upon how Muslims could mistreat the Quran based off of 1590-91. He sort of demonstrated that if you don't really fully acknowledge what the Quran is telling you, then you might as well be in that category where you are actually shredding the Quran. So he started off strong and then establishes the premises of what an Islamic dilemma looks like for him. And then came along Brancatella. And Brancatella, I believe, got in a new aspect with which he intended to nail down David Wood. He got into this aspect of dhimmi status or dhimmi dilemma, and he sort of built on his defense about around the verse 929, and how Islam required, or how the Quran required, the Jews and the Christians to obey the Quranic code or doctrine or judgment, because the previous scriptures, according to him, were invalidated, okay, or not preserved. So therefore, hence, they had to really follow what the Quran had to judge in terms of what the doctrine is or what the laws are that they have to be observing, okay. So he got in this new element, which I believe was an element of surprise to David Wood. But I believe towards the end, David Wood tackled it to a certain degree. I think he tackled it appropriately, I suppose. So before I get there, once the opening statements were done, and the issue of inspiration, I suppose there were three aspects that even David Wood was highlighting: inspiration, preservation, and then authority. I think inspiration-wise, both of them, obviously there would be no disagreement, because both the Torah and the Injil and the Quran were all inspired. So Jake Brancatella and David Wood would be in agreement on that particular point. So when it comes down to the preservation, that's where David Wood would insist that the scriptures that they have are intact, are preserved, are fully preserved. And that's where the disagreement is manifest in Jake Brancatella denying that the earlier scriptures are preserved. And that's the Islamic dilemma right there, right? So in inspiration, there is conformity. In preservation, there is a conflict. So Jake would argue the previous scriptures are corrupted, not preserved, and David argues the previous scriptures are preserved. Otherwise, you have a dilemma, a strong dilemma. But if they are preserved, you have weak dilemma. In both cases, he believes the dilemma stands. So that's his position, right? Anyway, coming to the third point, I believe before I discuss the third point, authority, I would just want to. Okay, let me speak about authority first. So authority was again used as a tool to build upon Islamic dilemma, which I believe Jake surprised David Wood, and he brought in this verse 9:29 and argued authority was the best defense against Islamic dilemma, and he sort of established why the Quran required the Jews and the Christians to obey the laws of the Quran, else face the dhimmi status, right? Okay, so in total, towards their closures, I should say, the debate closures, or the rebuttals, not the closure, the rebuttals, I believe the debate sort of leveled out, mainly because David Wood sort of budged a little bit. He brought in the element of the fundamental doctrine when Jake was arguing with David Wood around the subject area from Matthew 23 that the Pharisees were to be heeded to, and to the disciples of Christ. So that was the advice. So therefore, David Wood responded to that and saying it was only in the fundamental doctrine. And as soon as he spelled that out, I thought he had lost his lead in the debate, because that's exactly, even though Brancatella did not effectively respond to the conceding of this particular point by David Wood, in effect, he sort of capitalized it towards the end when a questioner questioned him, which I would just play you a little clip here. So Jake sort of eventually leveled out the debate because of that particular point that David Wood sort of conceded by his own statements that there is this fundamental doctrine that's sort of what is sort of required, and not the entirety of it, mainly because Brancatella sort of brought in the elements such as the dietary laws and all of that reformation. There were amendments that took place with the Sabbath and the dietary laws and all of that sort of stuff. So David would concede that it's not about these nitty-gritty things, it's not about the dietary laws, it's not about the Sabbath, it's about the fundamental doctrine. And well, there we go. So that's exactly what even Jake, or for example, Daniel Hakiko Jew, would also argue that the Quran provides a general confirmation of the fundamental doctrine. So this is where I think, David Wood sort of conceded his lead, I should say, not that he lost the debate. In my opinion, this debate, I would say, it's not a victory to David Wood, and it's certainly not a victory to Jake Brancatella either. So it's pretty even, a draw match, I suppose it was. And now let me discuss why that is the case, why my judgment or my adjudication is a draw, right? So let me discuss that with you guys. So I believe just my stream is up and running. Let me just check my stream if it's all good. Okay, looks like it's good, but okay, let me just open this up. Stream if it's okay. So yeah, let me now dig in and sort of give you a breakdown of why I draw the match. Okay. So before I do that, let me have you hear this.
Problem for you, because as I pointed out, the passage in Matthew 23 says that Jesus is telling the people, the crowds, which David claims they must be all Jews, but I don't think that you can definitively prove that all of them are being told to follow everything that the Pharisees tell you. So we're dealing with the Pharisees. Now, if you want to say that there are different groups of Pharisees and the Pharisees may have even disagreed with one another, then that's a problem for you, because according to David, they have to follow everything in what Matthew's gospel is saying, but yet you have different groups of Pharisees disagreeing with each other, so how do they follow everything? The obvious interpretation is that everything isn't meant to be taken so literally there, and if you can grant that, then stop having a ridiculous interpretation of the Quran. That's the point.
Ready.
Okay, so there you go. So this is where I believe Jake sort of leveled out the debate, and David Wood conceded his lead. Now, what's really going on is, let me first dissect the defense put up by Jake Brancatella. Okay, Jake Brancatella got in the verse from the Quran 9:29. And he argued that the Quran requires the Jews and the Christians to be observing the legal code of the Quran. Else they would be fought and they would be brought under submission and made to be living a dhimmi life. Right? So I believe it was a misrepresentation of the particular Quran verse in the way that the Surah 5, Surah Al-Ma'idah, was last of the surahs to be revealed in the Quran. So the Surah 5 required the Jews to follow their public affairs as per the code that's found in the Torah, and the same for the Gospel. So a surah that was revealed towards the end, one of the last of the surahs to be revealed in the Quran, sort of requires the Jewish and the Christian community to use their doctrines, their legal code, not the doctrines, but the legal code as found in the books, in the Torah and in the Gospel, and that they have to establish that, else they would be condemned. So when the Quran chapter 5, which was the last revealed surah, requires them, there is no further Quran to abrogate these verses. So these verses that dictate or they require the Jews and the Christians to be following, observing the legal code in their books does not get abrogated. You know, it just stands. It's there. It's that it expresses God's will. Correct? So for Jake to go and get a verse from 9:29 and then sort of make an argument that the verses from Surah 5 were not really effective, and what was effective was 9:29, but he should know that 9:21 was revealed before chapter 5 was revealed. So 9:29 would not abrogate chapter 5. So that's important for Brancatella's defense. It's sort of not a coherent defense, I should say, that Brancatella was presenting, just for the mere fact that the revelations, the progressive revelations of the Quran, were not like how Jake Brancatella understood them to mean, or them to be, or what they would mean, because the Quran explicitly clarifies or clarified that God required the Jews to establish the Torah and required the Christians to establish the Gospel. So 9:29 was taken out of context. Jake did mention the prohibitions in 9:29 that were not met by the Jews and the Christians, and he understood them to be dietary restrictions, but they are not dietary restrictions. They were political restrictions or political treaties or political um, armistice that Prophet Muhammad would have had with the northern tribes, the northern Christian tribes, and the Jewish tribes all the way in the Medina. So when the Jewish tribes would fight Prophet Muhammad, God would say, okay, therefore, when they nullify their commitments to you of security arrangements between them, you can fight them back. So the fighting verse in 929 does not apply to the dietary restrictions of the Quran. It was in a military context when there was a breach of treaties that they had with the Jewish people, and also the Christian northern tribes, the Ghassanid garrisons in the north, who were allied with the Roman Empire. So when there was a breach of security agreements, that's when 929 is effective and requires the Muslims to fight the disbelievers among the Jews and the Christians, and bring them to a dhimmi status, right? So that's what 929 is all about. And for Jack to take that out of that context and apply to dietary restrictions was not impressive. I was not impressed by that from Jake Brancatella. But that's about the arguments that Jake Brancatella got to the table based on the authority. So therefore he concluded Jews and the Christians had to follow. So the previous scriptures were not preserved. So you had to follow the Quran, and that was his point. So that's a weak argument, I would say. So that was on authority. On preservation, though, Jake insisted the scriptures were not preserved, and sort of did not give or build his story on what elements of those things were not preserved. And David Wood sort of highlighted the preservation of those texts and would build on absolute confirmation of the Quran, of the previous scriptures, even though the Quran does not do that. But David Wood also failed to sort of, or contradicted himself later on, because he brought in the fundamental doctrine to the table himself, which was a loose shot, I believe, on his side. But yeah, because the same argument would apply to the Quran, that Quran was giving or providing a general confirmation of the fundamental doctrine. So I think it slipped off from David Wood on that particular point. But David Wood, on the preservation, also fails to sort of substantiate the take of the gospel on the Old Testament, especially if he's a Trinitarian who believes, or a Catholic who believes, or even a Protestant who believes, in the grace model, that you live off the grace and it's a new covenant and the old covenant is sort of binned. So if you are doing that, if Jesus could do that from the gospel, if essentially the gospel could annihilate the Old Testament and the Old Covenant, then basically you have no food to eat with the Quran if the Quran does the same thing, for example, where Brancatella argues from, right? So that's why I sort of adjudicate the debate to have been leveled. David could have built on to a win without mentioning the fundamental doctrine, which I think he did. He does this for the first time, I suppose. Or maybe I was perhaps not aware. But yeah, that's the thing with him. So that's how I see this debate go, right? So there's a guy here in my chat saying Sam destroyed you. No, he didn't destroy me. Bring him on. You guys have no idea how I destroyed him. He understood my hurricane that I unleashed upon him, and he navigated away from it. I told him what the Torah was, and he understood it. But he played a exact word fallacy with me, which I just dismissed him on that particular side of the story, calling him a baby brain, because He understood my answer and he navigated away from it with a exact word fallacy. But you guys don't understand that because you are blind sheep and cattle and livestock. If you're blinded, you don't see things. Your brain is, severed with neurons. The neurons are not playing well in your brain, so you don't understand. So that's about this debate. I challenge you to bring your God Logic or your Samson Shamon to debate me. Bring them on. Bring them on MDD, Modern Day Debates. Modern Day Debates, James already told me that God Logic doesn't want to face me. He's not interested. What is he doing? Sitting and playing games on his computer, talking to people who are not well informed and dominating him because of their tradition, etc., etc. What is he doing? Are those good games to play? Go and ask him. Why do you give him a free ride? Let him face the challenger. Ask him, God Logic, to face me. Or your Sam Shimon to face me. There's no point. He should not retire. He is playing smart. He's retiring, shouldering responsibility to God Logic. That's not the way to do things. David J. Lynn is far better than your Scam Shimon. He's far better. He doesn't scam people. David J. Lynn. He's a good guy. I intend to engage him. I've sent him emails. We'll see how he responds. But yeah, that's the truth. Okay, that was my breakdown of this debate with David Wood and Jake Brancatella. I intend to debate David Wood one day, whenever he's ready for it, and see what is this Islamic dilemma after all. Okay.